The night presses close, and you feel the hush of the world settling around you. A silver glow hangs in the sky, not quite the moon, you know, but something brighter, heavier, as though Olympus itself tilts just above your ceiling. You breathe in, slow, and the air tastes faintly of smoke and roses, like the two can't quite decide who wins tonight. Somewhere, a lyre hums a single note, one that lingers long enough to make you hold your breath, and in that pause, you realize, you are no longer in your room. You wander into the halls of Olympus. They aren't halls in the way you'd expect, no sterile white marble like a museum, no neat columns like the textbook photos you skimmed in school. No, these walls are alive. Ivy coils like snakes along their surfaces, and each golden torch burns with an eternal flame that bends toward you as though curious. Above, constellations crawl slowly across a painted ceiling that doesn't bother pretending it isn't the sky itself. Here, love is not gentle. It is not chocolates and flowers, not movies with tidy endings. On Olympus, love is lightning in your lungs. It's the kind of thing that makes gods burn cities or gift immortality with a careless flick of the wrist. And when it ends badly, and it almost always does, it shatters so hard that even mortals centuries later still whisper the pieces. You probably won't survive this, but hey, that's half the fun, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, comment your location and the local time, because I want to know just how far across the world these midnight wanderings reach. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first steps, and every echo feels like it belongs to someone else's footsteps. Maybe it's Aphrodite, gliding barefoot, her laughter dripping like honey. Maybe it's Zeus, storm-eyed and restless, searching for another mortal heart to rattle like a toy. Or maybe it's you, dragged forward by stories you've half heard but never lived. Tonight, you will. The strange thing about these myths is that they all start so beautifully. That's the trap. Even the saddest tragedies begin with hope, with the sense that this time, maybe, love will outsmart fate. And you? You almost believe it. Think of Orpheus and Eurydice. Their tale is waiting in the shadows, but before we fall into that, consider this: music in ancient Greece wasn't background noise. It was power. Entire armies marched to it, kings were soothed by it, and odd detail incoming. Historians say Spartans actually timed their chewing to flute music during meals so they wouldn't look uncivilized crunching too loudly. Imagine that, a whole army munching in rhythm. But here's where the scholars start their bickering. Some argue that love in these myths was never about affection at all, it was about control, about gods showing off their power. Others insist that, hidden beneath all the thunderbolts and curses, there was something heartbreakingly human, something fragile. Maybe that's why the stories survived. They weren't just divine soap operas, but reflections of your own quiet, desperate need to be seen. You pass by a painted tapestry where Pyramus and Thisbe lean against their faithful wall. Their hands almost touch, and you can hear the whisper of their words slipping through cracks too thin to widen. Across the hall, a laurel tree grows out of cold stone, its leaves trembling though no wind blows, Daphne's prayer frozen forever. These aren't just decorations. They're warnings. And yet, you keep walking deeper, as if drawn. You can't help it. Humans have always done this, walked willingly into stories that promised heartbreak. Shakespeare borrowed it. Hollywood remakes it. Even your late-night playlist probably has one or two tracks that sound like Eurydice's footsteps fading away. Here on Olympus, the gods don't apologize for the cruelty of it. They watch, they laugh, they cry in their own strange ways. To them, love is the greatest game. To mortals, it's a fire that burns too close. And to you? Well, tonight, it's both. Already, shadows are gathering at the far edge of the hall. You can feel them cooling the air. Something waits there, a man with a lyre, and beside him, a silence too heavy to be natural. You don't need anyone to tell you, this is where Orpheus begins. But before you reach him, pause. Look around one last time. The flickering flames, the stars moving overhead, the vines tugging gently at your ankles. This is Olympus as it always was, not just the playground of gods, but the cradle of stories where love blazed bright, burned out fast, and left you aching long after. You step closer, ready to listen, ready to feel, ready to break just a little with every tale. And so, the first tragedy stirs awake. The shadows part like a curtain, and you see him. Orpheus, the man who could make even stones weep. His fingers rest on the strings of his lyre, and though he hasn't played yet, you swear you hear the echo of a melody already trembling in the air. His eyes are fixed on a horizon you cannot see, and in them burns that reckless, dangerous thing, hope. You follow him, quiet as possible, as though even your footsteps could disturb the fragile balance. Beside him, the memory of Eurydice clings to the air like smoke. You can almost see her soft outline, graceful smile, the kind of presence that turns a room into a sanctuary. For Orpheus, she wasn't just a bride. She was everything the songs were written for. But fate, in Olympus, doesn't like perfection. One careless step, one viper hidden in the grass, and Eurydice's laughter broke off into silence. That's how quickly joy becomes shadow here, one moment alive, the next swallowed by Hades' realm. Orpheus doesn't take it lying down. Most mortals would mourn, but he decides to march straight into the underworld and ask for her back. Bold move. Even heroes who swung swords and wrestled monsters wouldn't dare. But Orpheus had something sharper, music. You walk beside him as he descends, and it's strange, you don't feel fear. The air grows colder, yes, and shadows stretch long, but his lyre's hum steadies you. It's said that when he finally stood before Hades and Persephone, his song was so powerful it made the Furies cry. Think about that, the literal embodiments of vengeance, creatures who punish the wicked with unrelenting torment, sniffling like toddlers at bedtime. That's the weight of his love turned into music. Here's a mainstream historical fact to keep your brain awake. In ancient Greek theater, plays about Orpheus were among the earliest tragedies ever performed. The idea that love could drag someone into the underworld wasn't just myth, it was entertainment, the kind people bought tickets for while snacking on figs. And yet, scholars still argue whether Orpheus was foolish or brave. Was he really defying death, or was he too blinded by grief to see the impossibility of it all? That's the thing about these myths, you can read them as courage, or you can read them as madness. Odd detail, in some versions, while Orpheus sings in Hades' court, even the wheel of Ixion, that endless spinning punishment, pauses. Imagine being doomed to eternal torture, and suddenly you get a short break just because one guy's heartbreak is that catchy. If Spotify had existed back then, Orpheus would have been #1 every week. You tread further into the gloom. Hades listens, stone-faced but unmoved, until Persephone's gaze softens. It's always Persephone who understands. She leans in, whispers something you can't quite catch, and finally Hades nods. A deal is struck. Eurydice may return to the living world, but with one condition, Orpheus must not look back until they both stand beneath the sun again. Simple, right? Just don't turn around. Don't check. Don't let doubt eat you alive. And yet, you feel it already, the itch at the back of your neck, the gnawing worry. What if she isn't really there? What if the gods tricked him? What if all he's hearing is footsteps made of echoes, not flesh? You walk behind him as the path winds upward. Every step feels like balancing on the edge of a blade. His grip tightens on the lyre, but his eyes never leave the road ahead. The silence is unbearable. Eurydice's footsteps follow, soft, softer still, as though the shadows themselves are trying to muffle them. You know what's coming, but you still want to shout at him, don't do it. Don't you dare turn around. Hold on. Just a little longer. The light of the surface is just ahead, thin, golden, warming the stone. Orpheus stops. His shoulders tremble. He tilts his head just slightly, and you can hear his breath catch. And then, against every promise, every plea, he turns. For a heartbeat, you see her. Eurydice, eyes wide, reaching, lips parting as though to forgive him even as the shadows reclaim her. Her fingers slip through his, weightless, vanishing like smoke. She fades back into the dark with a final look that says everything, love, sorrow, and the cruel knowledge that he had been so close. The silence afterward is unbearable. His lyre hangs useless in his hand. You can almost hear the gods laughing, not out of cruelty, but because this is how stories in Olympus end, not with victory, but with heartbreak so sharp it leaves you awake long after. You want to comfort him, but there's nothing to say. Sometimes love is lost not because of fate, but because of our own doubt, our own inability to trust that what we love will still be there when the light comes. Orpheus sits, broken, and the underworld swallows its silence again. The air feels heavier now, as if the whole world is carrying Orpheus' grief with him. You linger beside him on the cold earth where his footsteps falter, where the golden glow of the upper world slips farther and farther away. He doesn't move. He just sits there, lyre across his knees, staring into the tunnel that swallowed Eurydice forever. And you don't dare breathe too loudly, because this moment feels like it belongs to sorrow alone. It isn't just the loss of a wife. No, it's the collapse of hope itself. Orpheus had already done the impossible, walked through Hades' gates, moved the heart of Persephone, made the unmovable pause. And yet, with a single glance, he destroyed everything. You feel it burn in your chest, the tragedy of being human, of being so close to joy and still ruining it with one twitch of doubt. He plucks a single note on his lyre, and it doesn't sound like music. It sounds like regret. Another follows, softer, as though he's apologizing to the shadows themselves. Soon the melody unfurls, and you realize this is not just mourning, it's confession. He sings not to gods, not to mortals, but to Eurydice, wherever she is. Odd detail, ancient Greeks actually believed music could influence not just emotions but physical reality. There are old reports that certain rhythms helped crops grow or healed the sick. So when Orpheus plays, you half expect the trees around you to lean closer, the grass to bow, the stars to flicker in sympathy. And maybe they do. You stay close as he wanders, a ghost among the living. Fields bloom where he walks, then wither when he leaves. Scholars still argue whether his songs were a gift from Apollo himself or whether they were born purely from mortal pain sharpened into art. Either way, he becomes a moving wound, singing to the earth because he has no one else to hear him. A mainstream fact for your restless brain, some ancient philosophers pointed to Orpheus as the prototype of the poet, the original tortured artist. They said his myth explained why art has such power, because it was born from loss. Every poem, every song, every sculpture echoes of someone you can't touch anymore. The gods watch. Some pity him. Others sneer. And somewhere in the mortal world, women listen to his voice and fall hopelessly in love with the broken man who never looks back at them. He ignores them all. Eurydice is the only name in his music. But here's the cruelest twist, sometimes, grief is more dangerous than joy. Orpheus' songs remind the gods that mortals can hold too much power. A melody that stops the furies, that melts Persephone's heart? That's no longer entertainment, that's a threat. And so, his story narrows toward another ending. Some say it was the Maenads, wild worshippers of Dionysus, who tore him apart in frenzy because his songs rejected their ecstatic rites. Others whisper that the gods themselves sent madness into their hearts to silence him. Either way, one day Orpheus plays his final song, and a mob descends. His body is scattered, his lyre cast into a river. You pause at the edge of that water. The current is slow, steady, and yet you swear you hear strings still vibrating as the instrument floats away. They say the muses gathered his head and placed his lyre in the stars, so even now, when you tilt your gaze upward, you're not just looking at constellations, you're staring at grief made eternal. And Eurydice? She never speaks again. No hidden reunion, no secret second chance. Just silence. Some versions of the myth soften the blow, saying the two were finally reunited in the underworld after Orpheus' death. But that's the thing about myths, they give you just enough comfort to make the pain sharper. You sit beside him, or at least the memory of him, and you realize this story isn't just about gods and music. It's about you. About that time you looked back when you shouldn't have, doubted when you should have trusted, lost something because you couldn't hold steady long enough. Orpheus fades into silence, but his grief doesn't. It lingers, heavy in your chest, as though you're carrying his lyre now. And maybe you are. Every song you've ever heard about heartbreak, every midnight whisper that feels like it cuts deeper than it should, that's Orpheus, still playing through you. The shadows shift again. Ahead, a new wall rises, not stone this time, but brick. You hear whispers slipping through the cracks. Two lovers, leaning close but never touching. Pyramus. Thisbe. The next tale waits. You find yourself standing before a wall, nothing majestic, nothing divine. Just brick and mortar, plain and unremarkable. And yet, this wall carries a secret heavier than Olympus itself. You lean closer and hear it, a whisper, soft, urgent, slipping through a narrow crack. On one side, Pyramus speaks. His voice is warm, impatient with longing. On the other side, Thisbe answers, her words trembling with excitement. They can't see each other, not really, but through this tiny gap, they build a world more real than anything the gods could conjure. You press your ear closer. Their conversations are filled with promises about stolen meetings, about love so fierce it makes the boundary between them unbearable. Imagine that, a romance blooming not in palaces or temples, but between two teenagers whispering through a wall. Shakespeare would later borrow this idea for Romeo and Juliet, but here's the thing, the Greeks wrote the tragedy first. Odd detail for you: archaeologists found that some Greek households really did share dividing walls thin enough for sound to carry. So it's not hard to picture two restless hearts lying awake, whispering into cracks, hoping the night would keep their secret. But of course, secrets rarely survive in these stories. Their families are bitter enemies, the kind of rivals who would rather spill blood than allow love. And so, like all lovers trapped by fate, Pyramus and Thisbe hatch a plan. Meet in secret. Escape the suffocating rules. Write their own ending. Scholars still argue whether the myth of Pyramus and Thisbe was meant as a cautionary tale about youthful recklessness or a poetic celebration of love's defiance. Some insist the moral is simple: love that burns too fast ends in ash. Others say the point is that love, even when doomed, is worth every stolen breath. You close your eyes and imagine them planning their meeting. The mulberry tree, white-berried and wide-branched, becomes their chosen spot. A safe haven in their minds, though you and I both know better by now. Olympus doesn't grant havens. It grants illusions of safety before yanking them away. Still, for one night, hope pulses bright. Thisbe slips from her home first, cloaked against the watchful eyes of family and guards. Her heart beats so loud you think the whole city might hear it. She reaches the tree, but the night isn't empty. Out of the shadows, a lioness appears, its mouth stained with blood from a fresh kill. Thisbe freezes. Terror silences her, and in that silence, the story turns. She flees, but in her panic, she drops her veil. The lioness paws it, blood smearing the fabric, then wanders off uninterested. For Thisbe, it's a narrow escape. For Pyramus, arriving moments later, it's devastation. You watch him kneel, trembling hands clutching the veil. Blood, shredded cloth, absence, his mind writes the only conclusion it can. His love is gone, devoured. His fault. His failure. He presses the veil to his face and breaks. A mainstream historical fact to ground you: the Roman poet Ovid included this myth in his Metamorphoses, a work so influential it shaped European storytelling for centuries. Without Ovid's version, Shakespeare might never have written Romeo and Juliet. Imagine that, one ancient story whispered through time, passed like a secret through the cracks of history's wall. Pyramus doesn't whisper anymore. He curses himself, curses fate, curses the gods who watch and do nothing. And then he does what so many tragic lovers in myth do: he draws his blade. You try to shout, to reach him, but the story is already written. Steel flashes, blood spills, and he collapses beneath the tree that was meant to shelter their joy. His blood soaks the earth, dark and heavy. The white berries above begin to change, crimson blooming across them as though the tree itself cannot bear to remain untouched. And in that moment, Thisbe returns. Breathless, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with relief. She made it, safe. She lived. But when she sees him, her Pyramus gasping his last, the blade still in his chest, her cry splits the night in two. You can't move. You can't stop it. All you can do is listen as she takes his body into her arms, her sobs staining the ground with grief. She begs him to open his eyes, begs the gods to undo what's been done. But Olympus is silent. When she realizes he's gone, truly gone, she makes her choice. One last kiss, one last whispered vow, and she takes his blade for herself. The wall that once divided them could not. Death will not either. You watch the mulberry tree sway above them, its berries forever marked red. Not just fruit anymore, but monuments to love that dared and failed, that whispered through cracks and ended in silence. The wall before you fades. The voices fall quiet. And you, standing in the dark, feel the weight of their secret press against your chest. The tree still sways in your memory, its branches heavy with crimson berries. You step closer, the air thick with iron, the scent of blood so sharp you can almost taste it. The mulberry tree, once ordinary, now bears the stain of tragedy. And you realize, in Olympus, even plants cannot stay innocent. They, too, are dragged into the theater of love and loss. You crouch beneath the shade, running your fingers along the bark. It feels warm, almost alive, as if it remembers. Every leaf shivers, not from the wind, but from the voices still echoing in its roots, Pyramus groaning his last breath, Thisbe's cry splitting the silence before she joins him. Together, their blood pools at the base, soaking into the soil, transforming white fruit into a permanent memorial. Odd detail, in ancient times, some believed mulberries were unlucky precisely because of this myth. Eating them wasn't just snacking, it was biting into a love story drenched in sorrow. Yet others thought the berries held protective power, a way to keep young couples safe from similar fates. Imagine that, a single tree carrying both doom and blessing, depending on who you asked. The berries overhead gleam redder with each heartbeat. They're beautiful, yes, but not comforting. They look like drops of frozen blood, hanging in defiance against the night. You wonder if the gods smiled at the irony, turning fruit into storytellers, ensuring no one could eat in peace without remembering two young lovers who died for whispers. A mainstream historical fact to pin this down, Ovid's Metamorphoses preserved the story of Pyramus and Thisbe in such vivid detail that it spread across cultures. From medieval romance poets to Renaissance playwrights, this tree grew roots far beyond Greece or Rome. Shakespeare took the seeds, planted them in Verona, and outsprouted Romeo and Juliet. So every time you see a balcony scene, you're really looking at a mulberry tree in disguise. You glance up again, and the branches sway like arms reaching out. The trunk creaks low, almost mournful, as though telling you, they were here. They are still here. But here's the scholarly debate, was this myth always about love, or was it a clever agricultural explanation for why mulberries turn from white to red when ripe? Some scholars argue it's nothing more than nature dressed in poetry, a fruit story with a tragic costume. Others insist the myth speaks to something deeper, how love marks the world physically, changing it forever, whether or not you want it to. And maybe that's the truth, you've seen it yourself. Places, objects, songs, they all become haunted by the people you loved. A street corner where you once laughed, a mug left in someone's kitchen, a scarf still carrying their perfume. Ordinary things, stained forever. Mulberry trees of your own life. The night deepens. You lean against the trunk, and the bark seems to breathe with you. You almost expect to see their shadows, Pyramus kneeling, Thisbe cradling him, their forms replaying like ghosts stitched into the wood. The more you listen, the more you swear you hear faint whispers between the leaves, as though the wall they spoke through still stretches invisibly between the branches. You close your eyes. Their story presses into your skin, heavy but not cruel. It feels almost like a warning, to love recklessly, but not blindly. To hold close, but not through cracks in walls. To see fully, before it's too late. And then the tree's whispers fade, replaced by the pounding of footsteps. Not whispers this time, not delicate longing, but a desperate chase. You hear laughter, bright, mocking, followed by the sound of branches breaking, of someone running for their life. You turn, and in the distance, a figure streaks past, hair flying, breath ragged. A nymph. Behind her, a god's gaze burns hotter than sunlight. The forest stretches before you now, tangled roots, sharp thorns, branches snapping underfoot. You hear it before you see it, the frantic rush of someone running, her breath ragged, her heart pounding so loud it echoes like a drum. Then she bursts into view. Daphne! Her hair streams behind her, wild and radiant, and her bare feet barely touch the earth as she races forward. She doesn't glance back, but you don't need her to. You already feel it. The heat behind her is unmistakable. Apollo, god of the sun, chasing with the certainty of one who believes no mortal, no nymph, no heart, can resist him. His eyes burn with hunger disguised as devotion, and his steps devour the ground. You press yourself against a tree, watching the chase pass like a storm. Apollo calls out to her, voice laced with promises. I'll treat you gently. I'll honor you. But his words drip with that golden arrogance only gods can muster. Daphne doesn't answer. She doesn't want his honor, his love, his fire. She just wants escape. Odd detail, in ancient art, Apollo is often shown carrying both a lyre and a bow, symbols of harmony and destruction in the same hands. It's fitting, isn't it? He can soothe you with music or pierce you with arrows. With Daphne, he tries both, pleading with words, pursuing with relentless speed. The forest bends under the weight of the chase. Birds scatter. Leaves whip across your face. Daphne's breath hitches, but she doesn't falter. She's sworn herself to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, vowing chastity, freedom, the right to her own body. To her, Apollo isn't a lover, he's a threat. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Roman poets, especially Ovid again in his Metamorphoses, used this myth to illustrate not just divine desire but the tension between male pursuit and female autonomy. It became one of the most painted and sculpted myths of the Renaissance, because artists were obsessed with capturing the exact moment Daphne transformed. Bernini's sculpture of her turning into a tree is still considered one of the most breathtaking pieces of art in the world. And here's where scholars still argue, is the story about divine punishment for defying a god's love, or is it about the triumph of resistance? Some say Apollo is meant to be pitted, a god punished with endless longing. Others say the heart of the story is Daphne's courage, choosing transformation over submission. Branches snap. Apollo is closer now, his hand stretching toward her shoulder. Daphne cries out, not for help from mortals, but for salvation from her father, the river god Peneus. Her prayer cuts through the forest, change me, destroy my beauty, but save me. And the gods listen. You watch in awe as it happens. Her feet root into the earth. Her legs stiffen into bark. Her arms stretch upward, fingers splitting into delicate leaves. Her hair, once flowing behind her, becomes a crown of laurel. Apollo lunges, but instead of warm skin, his hand closes around rough bark. He stops. His chest heaves. His golden face twists with something between grief and obsession. Before him stands not the woman he chased, but a tree rooted, silent, untouchable. And yet, Apollo doesn't let go. He presses his forehead against the bark, whispers words only the leaves can hear. He declares that if he cannot have her as a woman, he will honor her as a symbol. The laurel will be his tree. Victors will wear it as crowns, poets will weave it into garlands, and Daphne, though silent, will live forever in triumph. But you see the truth. This isn't victory. It's loss. Daphne's freedom comes at the cost of her body. Apollo's love becomes worship, but it's worship tainted by regret. Odd detail again, athletes in the ancient Olympic Games were crowned not with gold, but with laurel wreaths, each one a shadow of this story, each victory entwined with a reminder of a woman who refused to be possessed. You place your hand against the bark, and for a moment, it feels warm, alive. The leaves whisper in the wind, and you imagine Daphne's voice hidden within them, saying, better a tree than a prize for someone else's desire. Apollo lingers in the clearing, his shadow long under the sun. You don't stay. The sorrow is too thick here, too tangled in roots. You step away, deeper into the forest, until Apollo's sigh fades behind you. And then you hear another sound, not running feet this time, but an echo. A voice repeating your words back to you, just a little softer, a little fainter, like a ghost mocking your breath. You pause, turn, and realize you've entered another myth. The forest grows quieter here, almost unnaturally so. The chaos of the chase fades, replaced by a stillness heavy enough to make your ears ring. Then, there it is again. A voice. Not yours, not exactly. It repeats what you just whispered under your breath, "Is anyone here?" The reply floats back, soft, fragile, "Here." You step cautiously between the trees, and she emerges from the shadows. Echo. Her eyes carry a loneliness that hits you harder than Apollo's hunger ever could. Her lips part as if she wants to speak freely, but you already know the curse. She can only return what she hears. She is condemned to be a mirror, never the source. This curse wasn't random, it was Hera's doing. Echo once distracted the goddess with chatter, covering for Zeus's infidelities, and when Hera discovered the trick, she punished her in the cruelest way possible, stripping her of her voice, her freedom of expression. Since then, Echo has been a listener condemned to repeat, forever trapped in the words of others. Odd detail, ancient storytellers used echo to explain natural phenomena, the way voices bounce off canyon walls, mountainsides, or caves. But she was more than just a mythic explanation. To the Greeks, she was also a warning, sometimes even loyalty, even kindness, can turn against you when gods meddle. Echo's gaze shifts suddenly, and you follow it. There by the stream, a boy kneels, cupping water in his hands. His face is reflected back at him, and he doesn't look away. Narcissus. He is striking in a way that almost hurts to look at, cheekbones sharp, hair glinting like polished bronze, lips curved into a soft pout. But it isn't just beauty. It's the obsession in his eyes. He stares at his own reflection with a hunger that matches Apollo's for Daphne, only this time, the desire folds back on itself. Echo sees him, too, and you can almost feel her heart stutter. She steps forward, timid but desperate, her hands trembling as she reaches out. She whispers what little she can, "I love you." Narcissus turns, startled, scanning the woods. "Who's there?" he asks sharply. Echo's voice bounces back, "There." The pain on her face is unbearable. She wants to explain, to tell him everything, but all she can do is mimic, echoing his suspicion, his frustration, his dismissal. Mainstream historical fact, Narcissus's story was widely told in both Greek and Roman times, but it was the Roman poet Ovid who gave us the most famous version, the one where Narcissus falls so deeply in love with his reflection that he wastes away beside it. His death birthed the Narcissus flower, a bloom that bends its head toward the ground, forever gazing at itself. Scholarly debate lingers here, too. Some argue the myth is about the dangers of vanity, a morality tale against self-obsession. Others see it as something more tragic, a warning about unrequited love, about being unable to see the humanity in those who see us. Echo and Narcissus are not opposites, they are mirrors of different kinds. One can only reflect others, the other only himself. Both are prisons. Echo stumbles closer, whispering again, "Love you." Narcissus frowns. "You mock me." His voice drips with scorn, and when Echo's curse forces her to repeat his cruelty, it cuts her deeper than any blade. Humiliated, she flees into the trees, and her body wastes away with grief until only her voice remains. That's all she is now, a whisper in caves, mountains, empty halls, forever waiting for words that aren't her own. By the stream, Narcissus kneels once more, gazing into himself. He reaches out, tries to kiss the reflection, tries to embrace it, but the water ripples and denies him. Still, he cannot leave. Days pass, his body fading, his face sinking closer to the pool until at last he collapses into it, swallowed by his own desire. When the nymphs come to bury him, all they find is a delicate flower swaying where his body should have been. Odd detail, some ancient writers suggested Narcissus's flower was yellow, not white. A small but telling difference, gold for vanity, or pale white for innocence lost? Each color tells a different story. You crouch by the stream, staring at the flower. Its petals tilt downward, forever gazing at the water's surface, forever in love with a reflection it can never truly touch. The tragedy isn't just Narcissus's blindness, it's Echo's silence, her love wasted on someone who could only see himself. The forest feels heavier now, filled with echoes you can't escape. Your own breathing comes back at you from the trees, your own heartbeat seems to double. For a moment, you wonder if Echo herself lingers here still, waiting for someone who will finally say words she can bear to repeat. But before you can dwell too long, the air changes. The ground trembles. You hear the roll of thunder, not from the sky, but from beneath your feet. A shadow moves in the distance, massive, shifting, something more primal than gods or lovers. The myths are leading you downward now, into the underworld. Orpheus is waiting. And Eurydice walks just a step behind him. The air cools as you descend, as though someone has pulled a blanket of stone and shadow over the world. The stars above vanish, the trees thin, and you find yourself on a path lined with torches that burn low and steady, their flames an odd blue. Each step you take feels heavy, as if the earth is reluctant to let you pass. There, at the mouth of a cavern, a flicker of movement, Psyche. Her name means soul, and she looks every bit like one, luminous in her fragility, her eyes restless with longing. You can almost hear the murmur of her thoughts. She has been through so much already, and yet she is only at the beginning. It started with love. Or maybe with jealousy. Depending on who you ask, Psyche was either cursed for her beauty or chosen because of it. Mortals compared her face to Aphrodite's, which, as you can imagine, didn't go over well with the goddess of love. Aphrodite doesn't exactly do sharing the spotlight. So she devised a plan. She sent her son, Cupid, arrows to the Greeks to strike Psyche with an arrow and make her fall in love with the vilest thing alive. But love, as myths often remind you, refuses to obey even those who claim dominion over it. Cupid himself fell for Psyche, and he whisked her away to a palace unseen, a home of gold and music where she was cherished, with one condition: she must never look at him. At first, she accepted the mystery. But whispers crept in from her jealous sisters. What if he's a monster? What if he's hiding his true form? Psyche's doubt grew until one night she carried a lamp to his bed. She tilted the flame just enough to see him sleeping and nearly dropped the light in shock. The god of love himself lay there, beautiful, winged, and vulnerable. One drop of oil slipped from her lamp, searing his skin. He woke, betrayed, and flew from her. Now Psyche wanders, lost, searching for him. The gods have given her trials instead of answers, obstacles instead of comfort. Tonight, you follow her into one of those impossible tests. She kneels before a mound of seeds: barley, wheat, millet, poppy piled into a chaotic mountain. Aphrodite's cruel command: sort every seed into its kind by dawn. It's absurd, maddening. Psyche buries her face in her hands. But then, a rustle. Tiny legs. Ants. Dozens, hundreds, an army swarms over the pile, separating grain with more precision than any mortal hand could manage. By dawn, the task is complete. Mainstream historical fact: in ancient Greece, ants were seen as symbols of industry and loyalty. Farmers would watch them store seeds in underground chambers, a tiny reflection of human agriculture. Psyche's helpers were not random, they embodied the value Greeks placed on persistence through cooperation. But the trials only worsen. Next, Aphrodite demands golden fleece from man-eating rams. Psyche trembles at the riverbank where they graze, their horns sharp as knives, their hooves splitting the ground. Then, a reed whispers to her, wait until sunset. Then gather the fleece from the thorns where it catches naturally. She obeys, and once again, the impossible becomes possible. Scholars still argue whether Psyche's trials symbolize the stages of human growth: fear, patience, resilience, or whether they are simply narrative hurdles meant to stretch her suffering. But as you watch, it feels undeniable: each test is reshaping her, forcing her to become more than she was. And then comes the darkest task. Psyche must descend to the underworld itself and fetch a box of beauty from Persephone, queen of the dead. You already feel the weight of that place pulling at you, the cold breath of shadows, the silence that swallows footsteps. She walks past shades who beg for coins, for water, for compassion. She nearly falters when one ghostly figure pleads with her to look back, but she presses forward, remembering Orpheus, remembering the cost of even a single glance. She reaches Persephone, who greets her not with hostility but with a strange, sad kindness. The queen offers the box willingly, knowing what fate it carries. When Psyche emerges once more into daylight, her hands tremble. She cannot resist the temptation. If I open it, perhaps I'll be beautiful enough for him to love me again. She lifts the lid. Darkness spills out, not beauty, sleep, heavy and endless. Psyche collapses, motionless, on the path. Here comes Cupid. His wings beat the air, his face still raw with the memory of betrayal, but his heart breaks at the sight of her lifeless body. He brushes the sleep from her eyes, forgives her, and lifts her in his arms. Odd detail, some versions say Psyche is resurrected with a kiss, others with a single touch of Cupid's arrow. Either way, she awakens, reborn by love itself. The story doesn't end in tragedy this time. Zeus himself intervenes, granting Psyche immortality. She drinks ambrosia, the food of the gods, and ascends to Olympus. She and Cupid are wed, their union eternal. But don't relax too much. Love is rarely so merciful up here. Tonight, Psyche's trials have given you a reprieve, a taste of hope. Still, even in the golden halls of Olympus, betrayal waits just around the corner. And you're about to see what happens when devotion turns to fury, when love becomes sharper than steel. Medea is waiting. The path curls upward again, steep and narrow, the air tinged with the bitter smoke of torches. You climb until the shadows open into a throne room not carved from marble but from ambition itself. There, seated on a gilded chair he barely deserves, is Jason. And standing beside him, eyes glowing like embers hidden under ash, is Medea. You already know by her stance that this is not the beginning of their story. Once, she was radiant with love, blazing with the kind of devotion that makes mortals do impossible things. Once, she betrayed her father, her homeland, her gods, just to help Jason steal the golden fleece. Once, she was his salvation. The golden fleece wasn't a blanket or trinket, it was the shimmering skin of a sacred ram, guarded in Colchis, meant to test the limits of courage. Jason wanted it to prove his worth as a leader of men. Medea gave it to him, not because he earned it, but because her heart burned too brightly to see him fail. She used her magic to tame fire-breathing bulls, lull a dragon to sleep, and bend fate itself. And in return, she asked only for his love. Odd detail, in some versions of the myth, the dragon guarding the fleece was never truly defeated, it was merely put into a deep sleep by Medea's enchanted herbs. Which means technically, somewhere in the mythic landscape, a very grumpy dragon might still be snoring, dreaming of stolen treasure. But devotion, as you've already learned on this journey, can be fickle. Years later, Jason grew restless. His eyes wandered from Medea to Glauce, a Corinthian princess. A younger, politically useful bride. Medea, the woman who had crossed oceans, spilled blood, and defied gods for him, was suddenly an inconvenience. You feel it now, the tension rippling through the room like heat. Medea stands silent while Jason smooths his excuses, it's for our future. It's for the children. It's for the throne. His words are polished, practiced, but they clang against the stone like rusted chains. Mainstream historical fact, the myth of Medea was first told in oral traditions but reached its sharpest form in the plays of Euripides, written in Athens around 431 BCE. On stage, Medea's choices shocked audiences not because betrayal was rare, but because her vengeance broke every norm of womanhood, motherhood, and morality in Greek society. Scholars still argue whether Euripides intended her as a villain or a tragic heroine. Some say she represents the destructive force of love soured into rage. Others see her as a proto-feminist icon, refusing to be discarded by a man who used her. Here in the myth, though, there's no debate. There is only silence as Medea prepares her revenge. First, she sends a wedding gift to Glauce, a gown woven with spells, laced with fire invisible to the eye. The princess accepts it eagerly, admiring the fabric in her chamber. But when she clasps it against her body, the cloth erupts, flames crawling over her skin. Her screams echo through the palace until even the walls seem to tremble. Jason tries to save her, but when he embraces her, the fire consumes him too, burning his future to ash. And Medea is not finished. She looks upon her children, hers and Jason's, and her face twists into something even gods might fear. Some versions say she spares them, sending them into hiding. Others say she kills them with her own hands, reasoning that Jason does not deserve them, and no one else will raise them. The details vary, but the grief is constant. Love curdled into venom. Odd detail, one ancient commentator suggested that Medea may not have murdered her children at all. Instead, the Corinthians might have done it, and later storytellers pinned the blame on her to fit the narrative of the dangerous foreign woman. If true, then Medea's crime is less about murder and more about centuries of slander. But myth is rarely kind to nuance. Here, in this retelling, Medea takes her vengeance and flees. Her chariot, drawn by serpents with wings, lifts into the night sky. She vanishes into the clouds, leaving Jason to crumble in despair, stripped of power, family, and future. You remain behind in the silence that follows, ash still floating in the air. There is a chill in your chest, not from the smoke but from the realization that love is not just fragile, it can be lethal. And still, your journey through Olympus is not done. For what is more terrifying than love turned violent? Perhaps love that refuses to end, no matter how poisoned, no matter how cyclical. Up ahead, the thunder returns, this time not from the ground but from the heavens. A storm brews at the long table of the gods. You step into a hall too vast to measure, the ceiling lost in storm clouds that rumble softly, as though the sky itself is brooding over dinner. A long table stretches before you, set with goblets of gold and platters of ambrosia, the food of immortality. The air tastes faintly of honey and lightning. At one end sits Zeus, his hand drumming impatiently against the arm of his throne. At the other, Hera, her gaze sharp enough to cut marble. This is not a cozy family meal. This is the marriage of Olympus, a bond that keeps the heavens themselves from falling apart, but at a cost, endless strain. Zeus, king of the gods, master of storms, has the charisma of 1,000 rulers and the fidelity of, well, none. His affairs are legend, nymphs, mortals, even disguises involving swans and bulls. He is less a husband than a storm cloud drifting wherever it pleases. Hera, meanwhile, is goddess of marriage and queenship. Devotion, stability, and loyalty are her domain. To be bound to Zeus is both her crown and her curse. You sit between them, awkwardly clutching your cup, while silence stretches tight as a bowstring. Zeus finally clears his throat. Hera doesn't look up. Mainstream historical fact, ancient Greek society viewed Hera as the protector of women in childbirth and the sanctifier of marriage. Temples dedicated to her, especially in Argos and Samos, were among the oldest in Greece, suggesting she was worshipped long before Zeus rose to prominence. Some scholars even believe she may have once been considered the chief deity before mythology reshaped her as Zeus's consort. Odd detail, in some myths, Hera tried to resist Zeus's advances by transforming into a cuckoo bird. Zeus, cunning as ever, pretended to be a shivering bird caught in a storm. When Hera pitied him and held him close, he transformed back into his godly form and took advantage of her kindness. And that, according to legend, is how their marriage began, not exactly a meet-cute you'd want in a wedding toast. Scholars still argue whether Hera is a tragic figure or a powerful goddess choosing defiance. Was she forever defined by jealousy, punishing Zeus's lovers and their children, or was she simply the only one bold enough to hold him accountable? Each version tells you more about the storyteller than about Hera herself. Back at the table, the storm breaks. Hera's voice is cool, but every word shivers with suppressed thunder. Another nymph, Zeus? Another mortal, she asks. Her cup tips slightly, golden nectar spilling across the marble like a spreading crack. Zeus shrugs, lightning flickering in his eyes. It is my nature. You knew this. And there it is, the eternal argument, one that never truly ends. Zeus insists he cannot be chained. Hera insists that vows mean nothing if they are not kept. Around them, other gods and goddesses pretend to feast, pretending not to listen, though every ear is tilted toward the storm. The irony is impossible to miss. The goddess of marriage lives in a union riddled with betrayal. The king of the gods cannot master his own desires. And yet, they never separate. Their conflict fuels Olympus as much as their union sustains it. Without them, perhaps the heavens themselves would unravel. You wonder, watching them, whether this is love at all, or simply endurance. Maybe love among immortals is less about tenderness and more about collision, two forces locked in orbit, unable to break away. Oddly, it is in their rare reconciliations that the world feels it most. Hera and Zeus have moments of truce, even affection, and when they do, storms clear and the earth flourishes. But such peace never lasts. The tension at the table grows unbearable, until Zeus rises in a crackle of thunder and vanishes into the clouds. Hera remains seated, her eyes fixed not on the door but on the horizon, as though already plotting which of his lovers will suffer next. You can't decide whether to pity her or fear her. Maybe both. And you realize, love among gods is not like love among mortals. It doesn't fade with age. It doesn't soften with time. It endures, sharp and relentless, because eternity has no exit. The hall grows quiet. You set your cup down, your throat dry from nectar sweeter than you can bear. Around you, the other gods melt away, leaving the storm's echo behind. And then you hear the clash of armor, the rhythm of marching feet. Not the thunder of Zeus this time, but the heartbeat of war. For beyond divine feasts and jealous queens, love takes another shape, the bond between warriors. The kind of love that bends the fate of empires. You follow the sound, stepping onto a battlefield where Achilles and Patroclus are waiting. The ground is scorched and trembling, littered with broken shields and bent spears. You taste iron in the air, the metallic bite of blood carried on the wind. The Trojan plain stretches out before you, both magnificent and terrible, bathed in the orange haze of fires that never seem to die. And at the center of this storm, two figures move as one, Achilles and Patroclus. You know their names already, they are etched into history, whispered in classrooms, carved into marble. Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Greeks, almost invincible save for that famous heel. Patroclus, softer, gentler, but no less brave, his courage made sharper by love. Whether their bond was friendship, brotherhood, or something more intimate is a debate that still echoes through time. But here, in the rhythm of their movements, it hardly matters. Their closeness is undeniable. You walk with them through the Greek camp at night, where the firelight flickers across weary faces. Achilles sits apart, his rage burning hotter than any torch. He refuses to fight because Agamemnon, arrogant king of the Greeks, insulted him by stealing his war prize. It's a childish quarrel dressed in royal pride, but its cost is thousands of lives. Patroclus kneels beside him, trying to soothe the storm. If you will not fight, he whispers, then let me wear your armor. Let me lead the men. They will believe you have returned, and their courage will swell. Achilles studies him, eyes narrowing. He hesitates, not because he doubts Patroclus's bravery, but because he knows the danger. Still, love bends even the fiercest pride. Achilles places his armor on Patroclus's shoulders, each clasp a silent prayer. Mainstream historical fact, Homer's Iliad, composed around the 8th century BCE, never explicitly states the nature of their relationship. Ancient Greek audiences, however, were comfortable with the idea of warriors sharing both the battlefield and the bed. Later writers, like Plato, argued passionately that Achilles and Patroclus were lovers, while others insisted they were comrades bound by unshakable loyalty. The ambiguity itself became part of their legend. Odd detail, in some vase paintings, Patroclus is shown slightly smaller than Achilles, not because of age but to indicate a relationship dynamic, one more dominant, one more yielding. The art subtly suggests intimacy without a single word of explanation. You follow Patroclus as he leads the Greeks into battle, the borrowed armor gleaming like sunlight. For a moment, it works, the Trojans falter, believing Achilles himself has returned. The Greeks rally, and hope surges. But Patroclus pushes too far, chasing glory deep into enemy lines. There, at the gates of Troy, he meets Hector, prince of the city, defender of his people. Their clash shakes the ground. Patroclus fights bravely, but he is not Achilles, and Hector's spear finds its mark. He falls, dust rising around him, his last breath carrying Achilles' name. When word reaches Achilles, the sound he makes is not human. It's a howl that rips through the camp, a cry so raw the sea goddess Thetis rises from the waves to comfort her son. You feel it in your bones, the way grief can become more terrible than rage, the way love can shatter even the mightiest. Achilles returns to battle at last, his heart hollow, his fury unstoppable. He slaughters Trojans in numbers too great to count, rivers running red with their blood. But his focus is Hector. When the two meet, it is less a duel than destiny. Hector falls beneath Achilles' spear, and still Achilles is not satisfied. He lashes Hector's body to his chariot, dragging it around the city walls in a frenzy of desecration. Scholars still argue, is Achilles' brutality an act of revenge or of despair? Is he punishing Hector, or himself? Some suggest his rage was not against Hector at all, but against the gods who took Patroclus from him. Eventually, Priam, Hector's father, comes to beg for his son's body. And in that quiet tent, Achilles finally breaks. He weeps with Priam, one father mourning, one lover lost, both men bound by grief. For the first time since Patroclus' death, Achilles seems human again. Odd detail, some later traditions claim Achilles and Patroclus were buried together, their ashes mingled, so even in death they could not be separated. The Greeks believed such a union was the greatest honor and eternal companionship beyond the grave. You stand on the battlefield, the smoke curling around you, the echoes of war fading into silence. The bond of Achilles and Patroclus lingers like an ache, a reminder that love does not need labels when it is carved so deeply into the heart. The fires dim, and in their place rises a softer glow, the light of a moonlit shore, the gentle crash of waves. Another figure waits, her eyes searching the horizon for a ship that has already sailed. Ariadne stands on the island of Naxos, abandoned. Waves lap gently against the rocks, carrying the taste of salt and betrayal. You stand on the shore of Naxos, a lonely island draped in silver moonlight. The sea is vast and empty, but Ariadne still stares across it, her hair wild from the wind, her heart breaking in silence. She is waiting for a ship that will never return. Her story begins in Crete, in the labyrinth. You remember the twisting tunnels, the damp walls echoing with the roar of the Minotaur, half-man, half-bull, a beast born of divine mischief and mortal curse. Ariadne, princess of Crete, held the key to surviving that darkness, a ball of thread. She gave it to Theseus, the foreign hero who promised glory and victory. She told him to tie one end at the entrance and unspool it as he walked, so he could find his way back after slaying the monster. But the gift wasn't just cleverness. It was love. She looked at Theseus and saw not just a hero, but her escape, her future. So when he killed the Minotaur, she fled with him, leaving her father, her kingdom, her entire past behind. Love demands risk, and she gave everything. Odd detail, some storytellers claimed Ariadne didn't just hand Theseus thread. She may have also given him a sword from her father's treasury. If true, she armed him twice, once with steel, once with strategy. Either way, his victory was hers as much as his. And yet, here she is, abandoned on Naxos. Theseus's ship sails away, it sails dark against the horizon. Why he left her depends on which version you believe. In some, he betrayed her outright, tired of her now that the danger had passed. In others, the gods demanded it, whispering in his dreams that Ariadne was destined for another. She collapses on the sand, her tears mingling with the tide. The island is quiet except for the rustle of vines and the slow hum of insects. You can almost hear her whisper, soft and broken, "I gave him everything." Mainstream historical fact, ancient Athenians celebrated the myth of Theseus as their city's founding hero, often glossing over his betrayals. Ariadne's story, however, resonated more strongly in the islands, where festivals in her name honored not her abandonment, but her rebirth. On Naxos, she was not forgotten. Because this is not where her story ends. Out of the shadows of the forest, he comes, Dionysus, god of wine, ecstasy, and liberation. His crown of ivy glimmers in the moonlight, his followers singing faintly behind him. He sees Ariadne, broken, weeping, and instead of passing by, he kneels beside her. There's a gentleness in his gesture, a recognition. He does not demand, does not trick, does not take. He offers. And in her shattered state, Ariadne sees in him something Theseus could never give, constancy. Odd detail, Dionysus doesn't just marry her, he crowns her with a diadem, a jewel so radiant that Zeus himself flung it into the heavens. You might know it better as the constellation Corona Borealis, still glittering in the night sky. So if you've ever looked up on a clear night and seen that arc of stars, you've glimpsed Ariadne's wedding crown. Scholars still argue whether Ariadne's abandonment was tragic betrayal or divine redirection. Was she a victim of Theseus's cruelty, or was she always meant to ascend higher, to trade a mortal hero for an immortal god? Either way, the island of Naxos becomes not her grave, but her beginning. She rises now, her tears drying, her hands slipping into Dionysus's. Around them, the vines of the island seem to bloom in celebration. The sand under her feet feels less like exile and more like a stage. From sorrow, a new joy emerges, one wild, intoxicating, and eternal. And yet, as you stand with her, you can't help but feel the lingering sting of the story. To be abandoned is to be remade. To lose is sometimes the only way to find. Ariadne's thread guided Theseus out of the labyrinth, but fate pulled her onto a different path, one that wound upward, all the way into the stars. The waves hush, the wind softens, and the island seems to fade around you. Above, the moon brightens, casting silver across the sea. And in that light, another figure appears, drifting among the hills, her pale cloak glowing. Selene, the moon goddess, rides silently, her gaze fixed on a shepherd who sleeps forever. Endymion waits beneath her light. You tilt your head upward, and the night itself seems to hold its breath. The moon is swollen in silver, sliding slowly across the sky like a queen who knows all eyes are on her. Selene, goddess of the moon, drapes her cloak of light across the earth. She does not descend often, but tonight, you catch the shimmer of her longing. Her heart belongs to Endymion, a mortal shepherd resting among the hills of Caria. He is not a king, not a hero, not a slayer of beasts. He tends his flocks, lies beneath olive trees, and lets the stars keep him company. Yet the goddess of the endless sky chooses him. Why? Perhaps because he does not chase her. Perhaps because his stillness balances her endless wandering. You walk through the grass with her, feeling the night dew cling to your feet. Endymion lies nearby, his face soft in sleep, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Selene hovers above him, her fingers almost brushing his hair. You can hear her sigh, heavy with a love that feels both eternal and impossible. Mainstream historical fact, the myth of Selene and Endymion was especially beloved in ancient Caria, in modern-day Turkey. Local cults honored him as a figure touched by divine love, and his cave on Mount Latmus was said to still carry traces of moonlight. Travelers swore the place glowed faintly even on clouded nights. Odd detail, some storytellers claimed Endymion had 50 daughters with Selene, one for every night of the lunar month. Imagine the chaos of tucking in 50 moonborn children before bedtime. No wonder later poets preferred the version where he simply slept forever. Here's the cruel twist, Endymion doesn't just sleep. He is locked in eternal slumber. Depending on the version, Zeus punished him, granting eternal youth through sleep, or Selene herself asked for it so she could love him without time stealing him away. Either way, he never wakes. Selene kneels beside him, whispering words you cannot hear, words that melt into the night air. Her love is one-sided in a way that aches deeply. He never opens his eyes, never speaks her name, never sees the goddess who adores him. And yet she returns, night after night, to pour her silver radiance over his still form. Scholars still argue whether this is a romance or a tragedy. Is eternal sleep a blessing, keeping Endymion young and untouched by death, or a curse, robbing him of life and choice? And what of Selene? Is she a devoted lover, or a lonely goddess unable to let go? The hill is quiet, the sheep grazing gently in the moonlight. You almost envy Endymion's peace. No heartbreak, no betrayal, no decisions to make, just endless dreaming under Selene's watchful gaze. But then again, what is love without awareness, without reciprocation? Can devotion alone keep a story alive? The moon slides lower, kissing his brow with light. You feel the tension of the tale in your chest, the beauty of devotion, the cruelty of silence. Selene doesn't cry. She doesn't rage. She simply watches, a goddess bound not by chains, but by her own heart. The night grows colder, the stars scattering wider, and Selene drifts back toward the heavens. You feel the pull of her absence, a sudden vastness in the sky. The hills dim without her glow, and you realize how fragile the world feels when the moon hides her face. And then, like a soft turning of pages, you're drawn into another story of beauty and longing. This time, not a shepherd or a princess, but a musician whose song could charm stones and silence the dead. Orpheus is waiting, and his lyre is already singing. The night hums with a different music now. It drifts through the air like smoke, soft, trembling, impossible to ignore. You follow the sound and find him sitting on a stone, lyre in hand, his head bent as though every note is a prayer. Orpheus, the greatest musician to ever live, plucks strings that make the stars lean in to listen. But he doesn't play for fame, or for gods, or even for himself. He plays for Eurydice. She had been his light, his partner, his joy. Their wedding was supposed to be the start of something endless. Yet in the grass, a serpent struck. A bite, a cry, and suddenly, Eurydice was gone, her laughter stolen, her voice swallowed by the earth. Most mortals crumble when death steals their love. Orpheus? He marches into the underworld. No sword, no shield, just his music. And you walk with him now, deeper and deeper, until shadows cling to your skin and the air turns thick with silence. Mainstream historical fact, the myth of Orpheus was central to the Orphic mysteries, secret religious cults in ancient Greece. They believed music and ritual could bridge the gap between the living and the dead, offering the soul a path toward purification. Orpheus wasn't just a bard, he was a symbol of spiritual power. Odd detail, some said even the stones rolled closer when Orpheus played, as though the earth itself wanted to listen. Imagine trying to practice scales with boulders scooting across the room. His song bends the will of Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the dead. No one softens their hearts except for this. The lyre shimmers, and Eurydice's name hangs in the chords. They agree to release her. But with a catch. Always a catch. She will follow him back to the world above, step for step. He must not look back until both are free of the underworld. The path is steep, the silence heavier than stone. You walk behind Orpheus, your breath tight as you hear the faint footsteps of Eurydice following. Step by step, he climbs, his knuckles white on the lyre. And then, the doubt. Is she truly behind him? Is this all a trick? His love is too fierce, his fear too sharp. At the very edge of daylight, he turns. For a heartbeat, her eyes meet his. Relief, love, sorrow, all in one glance. And then she fades, pulled back into the shadows. Forever. Scholars still argue whether Orpheus failed because of human weakness or because the gods never intended to let her go. Was it hubris to think he could outweed death, or was it simply inevitable? His story lingers like a warning, trust requires blindness, and doubt can unravel everything. You feel the chill of the underworld cling to your skin even as you rise into starlight again. Orpheus is left alone, his music forever changed. The lyre still sings, but now every note carries grief. His melodies ripple through the world, tender and hollow, reminding you that sometimes love cannot conquer loss, sometimes, it only makes the absence sharper. The night is quiet again, save for one soft echo. A question hums in your chest, if even music can't bring back the dead, what can? But before despair settles too deeply, you sense the shifting of the air. Another story waits, one born not from music, but from pure, raw defiance. A tale where two lovers challenge the gods themselves, turning their deaths into a single bloom. The legend of Pyramus and Thisbe unfolds next. The world feels drowsy, wrapped in starlight, when you find yourself beneath the shadow of a mulberry tree. Its branches stretch like dark fingers across the night, and its berries glimmer pale, almost ghostly, as though holding a secret of their own. Here, two young lovers once met in secret, Pyramus and Thisbe, whose tale whispers like a prototype of Romeo and Juliet. You see them as they were, neighbors in Babylon, separated by a single wall. Through a narrow crack in the stone, their voices found each other. They whispered of love in hushed tones, the kind that grows stronger precisely because it's forbidden. Words carried what their hands could not. Promises lingered in the air where kisses never landed. One night, daring more than ever, they planned to escape together.
"Meet me by the mulberry tree," Thisbe whispered.
"There, we'll be free." And so she went, heart pounding, veil trailing, hope burning like fire. But fate always waits with cruel timing. At the spring near the tree, a lioness appeared, jaws red with the blood of its kill. Thisbe fled, her veil tumbling to the ground. The lioness tore at it, leaving it stained with blood. When Pyramus arrived, he found only the shredded veil and bloody prince in the dust. His mind leapt to the worst conclusion: his love was dead. Overcome, he pressed his blade into his own side beneath the tree's shade. His blood spilled, staining the white mulberries a deep crimson.
Odd detail, some ancient retellings said the berries remained dark ever after, explaining why mulberries are red or purple today.
A myth tucked into fruit, like a memory hidden in plain sight. When Thisbe returned, trembling but alive, the sight froze her breath, Pyramus dying, the ground dark with his blood. She cried out, cradling him, but his strength was already fading. His eyes searched for her, and when they met hers, he knew too late he had been wrong.
And Thisbe?
She chose not to live in the world without him. Taking his blade, she pressed it into her own heart, falling beside him.
2 young lives, cut by misunderstanding, bound forever in the shade of a tree.
Mainstream historical fact: the Roman poet Ovid immortalized their story in his Metamorphoses, a text that influenced countless later works, including Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Without Pyramus and Thisbe, Verona's star-crossed lovers might never have been imagined. Scholars still argue whether the myth was meant as a cautionary tale against youthful recklessness or a celebration of love that defies all barriers. The wall that separated them was both literal and symbolic, yet their devotion toppled it in the only way they knew, through sacrifice. You stand now beneath the tree with them, feeling the fruit heavy with history. The air is quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves, as if the lovers' whispers still linger in the branches.
The ground beneath your feet seems to remember their final vow.
And with that, the stories of love and loss, devotion and despair, fade into a softer rhythm. The myths have led you through labyrinths, moonlit hills, underworld caverns, and blood-stained orchards. You feel the weight of them, but also a strange comfort. If even gods and heroes wept, then sorrow is part of the tapestry, not a flaw in it. The mulberries sway gently above you, and you sense the world is ready to quiet now. The myths grow still, leaving you with starlight, wind, and the hush of night. The stories fall silent now, like embers cooling after a long fire. You sit beneath the branches of the mulberry tree, the night wrapping itself around you like a blanket. The air feels softer, slower, as though the gods themselves have slipped away to rest. You've walked through so many hearts tonight: Ariadne's tears on the shore, Selene's eternal vigil, Orpheus's trembling glance, Pyramus and Thisbe's final embrace. Each tale carried its own weight, but together they form a constellation of longing. Love, in all its fragile, unstoppable forms, shines even when it breaks. The stars above feel closer now, like lanterns hung low just for you. Maybe you picture Ariadne's crown glittering there, or hear the faint pluck of Orpheus's lyre carried on the wind. Maybe you see Selene's silver glow sliding across the hills. Whatever you notice, let it be gentle. Let it remind you that the night is patient, that sorrow can soften into calm. Odd thought, somewhere, mulberry trees still grow, their berries red with the echo of a story. People bite into them without ever realizing they're tasting a myth. That's how love works too: it lingers in places you don't expect, sweet and hidden. So you breathe in, slow and deep, letting your body grow heavy. The hum of the world around you fades to a hush. The myths won't chase you into sleep. They'll wait, quiet and eternal, like the gods watching from far away. And as your eyes grow heavier, know this: you are safe here. The night holds you. The stars keep their watch. And love, in every form, carries you forward even in dreams. Good night.